This is a little bit of a follow-up to this video here, the making a topographic transect with SketchUp and AutoCAD, but the video kind of hopefully will make sense on its own. And where I left off in this video, if you happen to watch it, was with a model about like this. And I've got some trees turned off on the layers here, but let me turn those on. It's not the exact same model, but pretty darn close. And what I want to do in this video is show you how to take this and clean it up. So here I've got fewer layers and I've got a whole bunch of sections that do certain things, and there's a few cleaned up geometries that I will explain. But let me just show you what these sections do. If I click on that first one, it's a section of the entire site, hence the name, site section. The second one is a detail section. It zooms in on a closer area. I've got one called human perspective and then one called overview perspective. And all of these first four scene tabs only save that property. If I open up the scene manager, I can see that I've only got camera location selected on each one of those. So that's the only thing that's saved. It doesn't matter what the style is. So if I change my style to monochromatic and go back to this scene tab here, notice that the colors don't change because I don't have the style and fog setting selected. Had I had that clicked, then it would remember that setting. Now these other ones, top view, just a straight top-down view, it does save the projection, whether it's parallel or perspective. And then I've got a few here that only save the shadows, and I've named them according to the time of day that the shadow is saved. I've got one here that just turns the shadows off right there, and then I've got one that turns on and off the layer states. So if I want to turn those contours on or off, I can use those last two scene tabs, and these kind of function with one another. For example, maybe I want the human perspective view and I want to turn off my contours. So the scene tabs just allow you a little bit more functionality. You can create your own template if you find that you use the same scene tabs on and off, more so than not. If I were to save this as a template, I'd probably want to delete all of the geometries first. But anyway, this video is not about saving templates. It's about getting to this from here. And I've already got one scene in here. I'm going to go ahead and delete that and just start over from scratch and get rid of my scene manager for the time being. A few things I'll do right away. Just generally good conventions here is I like to go into my model info and go to statistics and purge unused. And right away that will get rid of any unused layers that may have built up, because you can create the SketchUp model from scratch. You can import a bunch of files. When you import components, your layers can kind of get away from you if you're not careful. So sometimes just cleaning those up will do the trick. Now, if you remember in this video, I created some contours and the site extents in AutoCAD, and it remembered or brought over the names of those. And here's a situation where that's nice. Now, generally, I wouldn't recommend having geometries such as these contours floating out in space. And what I mean by that is they're just geometries. They're in a layer and they're not grouped. Just a good practice is to always draw things in layer 0 or have them drawn in layer 0 and then group them or put them in a component and then assign that component to a layer. But since these are not set up that way, here's a situation where we can actually kind of clean this up. It's a little bit tricky to get all of those contours, and they're kind of hard to see. Let me turn on my profile so you can hopefully see those a little bit better. And as always, remember that these are recorded in high definition. So in the lower right-hand corner on YouTube, you can usually crank up the playback resolution. But what I'm going to do here is right-click on one of these contours, and I'll go to select all on the same layer. So because the way that this was created, that's an easy way to go ahead and just make this large selection. Now what I can do is put those in their own group. And I'll just create a new group here. We'll call it my contours. Or actually, you know what? I'll just name it contours. And bring up the entity info by right-clicking entity info. My dialog is already open. And then I can click on this drop-down list and click on contours. There we go. Now those are in their own layer, but they're not grouped. I actually kind of forgot that's what I was trying to show you in the first place. So let's do that one more time. Select all on same layer. Then I will go to edit and make group. So now they're in their own group. They're easy to select and they can be easily turned on and off like that. Now, did I put those in layer 0? I may have. Let's try this. I'm going to put contours to my main one. Oh, it's kind of a mess. Yeah, so this is really messed up because what's happened here is I've got layers that are opposite of what I just described as a good practice, where everything should be really in layer 0 if it's free flowing geometry, and then you should assign the groups to different layers. So I'll go ahead and fix that right now. I'll go ahead and show you some cleanup steps that you can do to this model, and maybe yours if you have one similar. So I will double click and edit to this transect. And a good rule of thumb is if you can see a surface or an edge being selected, you're obviously inside of a component. And if you do a Control or a Command A and look at your entity infos, it will tell you if you've got groups or components in here. So this is nothing but entities, which means there's no more groups and components for me to worry about. And I can see that those are in layer 0. So that is good. Let me click in white space here to boot myself out. I'll highlight this layer and I'll create one called transect, because remember on this one, here's the 3 layers I want to go with for this example. Just contours, transect, and vegetation. So back here, I've got this selected. I'll make a new layer, call it transect, grab this, hit the drop-down list, and go to transect. You can also do it from the drop-down menu item up here as well. And I can turn that off just to verify that that is in fact complete. Now what is this? I've got one called, it's a group, it's located, I'm not even sure where that one's located. It's also locked. Just ignore that. Let me unlock it and delete it. That's something else I was working on. Contours. My contours are on layer 0, but the contents of this group, if I double click and edit, and I have my hide rest of model and hide similar components active, turned on. So that's why the rest of my model is being hidden as I edit this component. But what I'm going to do is select everything because I'm inside of this component, and I'll set that to layer 0 because that's the contents. And again, I'm just doing some cleanup here. Click outside of that component. Now I will set that component to contours, or that group. And now I can turn that off. The vegetation is a little trickier. If you follow the steps that I did here, we had some trees that came across in this vegetation. It used to be a block in AutoCAD. Now it got turned into a component, and it used to be a layer in AutoCAD, and it got turned into this layer. But when I swap them out with these land effects, it has its own structure. So here I've got the land effects canopy and tree. So even if I were to come in here and select all the trees, you know what? A little bit of review. Window, components. You can select these trees by right-click, select instances. Right-click. I don't want to replace those, so let me click out of here. With those selected, I could do the same steps, but because, let me just close that and close this. Whoops. You know what? I might want to keep my layers open. Put this down here. Because most everything else is turned off, I can just select everything and assign it to the vegetation, my new vegetation layer that I'll create here in a moment. But I see there's a few stragglers in here, so let me just get rid of those. Those lines, I believe, were created to help create the transect, so go ahead and get rid of those. Now I've only got my vegetation. Select everything. I can see it's kind of a mixture. And you know what? Hey, here's a neat Mac thing. I'm sorry, Windows users, you can't do this, but Mac users, can create layers on the fly just by typing it and hitting enter, and there you go. So Windows users, you will need to do the extra step of creating that layer first and then assigning it via the drop down menu. So vegetation, I can turn it off. So you would think that I would be able now to come into the model info and do another purge and see all of these unused ones go away, and I should only be left with contours, transect, and vegetation. Let's see what happens. Purge unused. Well, almost there, except there's these land effects ones, and the reason for those is because the contents of these trees are multi-nested groups, and it just has to do with how efficient this is drawn in. So you can see I've got 4 or 5 nested components. I'm going to hit escape to boot out of that. An easier way to see that is with the outliner. So let me go to my tools. Actually, where is the outliner located? The outliner is under Window and Outliner. And it looks like this. It's just a structured representation of your model. And inside of this maple tree that I have selected, there's another maple tree, and inside of that there's the trunk, and there's all these components, and it's like Inception. It just keeps going and going. So how do we get all of these rather than edit each one and going up here and assigning it to the correct layer? Here's a neat little trick you can do. In your layers dialog, very rarely will you, in my opinion, be selecting a layer to draw in. I'd recommend drawing everything in layer 0 and then grouping it and then assigning it to a layer, which is a little bit different than AutoCAD. AutoCAD, it's more common to switch layers on the fly in order to draw stuff directly in that layer. It just has to do with how the different applications organize and manage their data. But what we can do here is click on vegetation as the default layer, and then highlight, don't click on the little selection window, but click on the name and click minus. Why are we doing it this way? Well, because this next screen gives you the option to move the contents to the current, right here, layer, delete. So that's just another way to quickly, well, sort of quickly clean up your layers. I'll delete that and I'll move to the current layer. Now I'll go back to layer 0. Now everything is ready to be turned on and off, or better controlled with scene tabs if you wanted to do that. Now let's go back to the contour. I'm going to select that contour group, and with the entity info open, you should see a little material icon here. Now I'm not quite sure, I can't remember what it looks like on Windows, so I'll try this a different way here. I'm going to turn off everything but my contours, grab my paint bucket tool, and you know what, for the fun of it, I'm going to paint it blue. You know, it's already blue in selection. Let's do hot pink. Why not? So I'm painting that component or group pink. Now I can see it because I've got my materials, or I'm sorry, my styles set to color by material. And let me back up because I did that rather quickly. Window, Styles, brings up this dialog. Once you're here, click on Edit, and then on Edit, you've got 5 options that you can style or edit the style of. The first one is Edges, and down here, you can set it to color by material. If I do all same, the edges by default are black. So if you ever want to have your edges displayed the same color, you would want to turn on this setting here. Not to be confused with the layer color. The layer color, or couleur as SketchUp calls it, is inherited by the color of the layer in AutoCAD when you export that and import it in. If you wanted your SketchUp viewing experience to visually be similar to what you saw in AutoCAD, you can click this flyout here and select color by layer. So now those layers will be colored the same as they were in AutoCAD. Not to be confused with the styles dialog over here. So let me set that back to normal, and I've got that colored on. And let's turn on these other ones to see how it looks. Well, you know what? That might actually be informative if you wanted to really communicate where the layers were in this drawing. So, you know, I kind of like it. And let's go in now and clean up some of the contours. I briefly, you know, I don't even think I mentioned this in this other video. I created a separate private video for some people, but let me show you, depending on how you created this transect, you might have ended up in a situation like this. And I'm going to go ahead and save this because I would not want this to crash after I've shown you this so far. But, you know, at the end of the day, that's not that big of a deal. If you want to clean up those contours, here's how I would do it. So I'm going to borrow this bottom edge here, bottom face, which really represents the extents of this transect. So I'll double click to edit this component, highlight it, go to edit, and then copy, and then go outside of the component. Now this is a convention that I do a lot, so I would get used to this. It's not just this example, it's something that will serve you well. Now I will edit that contour if I can get it. It's a little tricky, so let's do this. Let's go to the side view. Double click right here. Now I'm editing that contour group, and I'm going to go to edit, paste in place. That's just a convention. Trust me, you will use it a bunch. Push pull tool, I'll push pull that all the way through, making sure to go well past. Another trick that I use a lot, and I'm sure you will too, is the intersect with selection, or intersect with anything. I've got the selection tool. I'll select all of these geometries, right click, intersect, and intersect with selection. Now, half of the time I do this, I get an incorrect message here. Let's see what happens. Okay, that time it worked. If you ever do that and you get a message saying there was no intersection, try it again. It's a little glitch I see from time to time, and sometimes it just doesn't hurt to do it twice anyway. So this is the dialogue I'll sometimes get when in fact there are intersections. Now, it's just a matter of going in here and clicking on those little edges and deleting them because they're separate from the rest of the model. Look at that, nice. What's the easiest way to get there? Well, here's what I like to do. I'll right click on this surface and go to align view. Now, if I get my dialogues out of the way, they're really tiny, but I can zoom in. And because I've got a straight aligned view, also very important is that I'm not in perspective. I'm in parallel projection. Now I can just grab these, being careful not to go too far, because if you extend that selection window too far, you'll grab things you don't want. Grab those, hit delete. Grab those, hit delete. And do the same thing on the other side. Grab those little edges, hit delete, and for some reason there's a little straggler dude. Zooming out, panning over, and now I'll just erase carefully that helper geometries that I no longer need. And if you are obsessive compulsive about your models being super clean, there you go. No extra hanging geometries over the edge. Let's make some scene tabs, and I would recommend create one first and get the settings how you want, and then create the follow-up ones. So here is the example one. I want a site section. Just a section that shows the entire site. And these come in super handy when you save this and go to the layout application. Well, I could use my standard views here. Where are they? Oh, they're over here. Usually they're on the other side. And I'll go to a front view, which is kind of a section, but not really, because look at this. It's actually looking at this, which is situated at a weird angle. So how do I get a straight view of just this edge, this face? Well, I just did it a little bit ago, and I'll do it again. You have to be editing that component because the face you want to align to needs to be selectable. So I can now select that edge, right click, align view. Now I'm looking straight across, and this is the scene I want to save. So I'll click in white space here. The scene tab It's kind of hidden at first. I don't know why, but it's under View, Animation, and Add Scene, because you can animate from scenes too. Maybe I'll show you something about that later. But here we go. Add Scene, Scene 1. And if I were to right click on that, go to the Scene Manager right away, here is where you can turn off. So I, for example, only want to save the camera location, and let's highlight that because you have to highlight your scene tab. When you get more than one on here, you'll see why that's important. And I'll give it a name of Site Section. Include an animation. If you don't check that, it puts it in parentheses and it just will not include it in the animation. I'll explain that in a few minutes. So I got my site selection. Let's hit return. That name has registered. I can close this. Now, no matter what I'm doing, I can zoom and orbit and go all around my model. I can click on site section and it goes back. So that's good. Right, well, what's the other one? I wanted one that was more of a detailed site section. So this is kind of an interesting section elevation up here. I'll zoom in. I'll pan, and it's showing me this levee, and I can kind of see the contours, so that's pretty good. Instead of going back to camera, or where was it, view, animation, add scene, you can now just right click on your scene tab and select add, and it will create a new scene tab. It'll also inherit the properties of the previous one. And PC users, you guys, all of your scene tabs, for whatever reason, are aligned left. Mac users, they start in the center and they're centered. But if I go add, now that one is added and it saved those properties. And by those properties, I mean the camera angle, because it doesn't save the styles. If I go to this view here, that view stays on. All right, what other ones do we have here? I had a couple perspectives, human perspective and overview perspective. The human perspective, I want to show you a little helpful trick for this. And here's a golf hole, a little par 3, I think. And I could zoom and try to kind of nudge my way in here, but there's two problems. One, humans generally don't see the world in parallel projection. We see them in perspective. So I will turn on my perspective. Also, if you click on the zoom tool and look in your value control box, which might be down here, it might be up here somewhere, just look around for it, but it has a number in it. And with that selected, the zoom tool, you can just type a number. You don't have to click anywhere. Just type 45 and hit enter, and it sets your field of view to 45 degrees. So I could do 60, enter, and it's just changing my field of view, which you can see more when you are zoomed in. But you got to be careful because it sometimes will give you this fisheye effect. So I'm going to go ahead and type 35 again. 35 is a pretty standard normal view. All right, the other tool is this position camera right here. And it works really well, especially if you have like buildings. You want to know what a view looks like out of a window. You can click on that tool, and then you can click on a window and drag to a position. Now, if you click it once, it just positions it 5 feet above that point, about 5 feet, I think. So it says my eye height is 45 feet 9 or 45.9, but that's because the point I clicked on was about 40 feet, and it just raised it up 5 feet. I can change that manually just by typing a number. So I'll type 50 feet and hit enter, and it raises me up 5 feet. I'll type 40 feet and hit enter, and it'll probably put me underground. Yep, I don't want that. So let's go back to 45 feet, enter. There we go. And you can click on the creepy eye right here. It also automatically sets you in that view, and then you can just click and drag to look around. So that's kind of neat. So that's one way to position your camera. I'm going to zoom out here and show you another way. And I'll go from over here this time. Position camera tool. Rather than click and release, I'll click and drag. So I'll click here, and I'm going to drag to here and let go. And then it aims your eye at that point. Now once again, look at my eye height. This time it doesn't automatically raise you up. It puts you at exactly that point. So what I'll do here is I'll just type 45 feet and hit enter. There we go. Raise me up a little bit. I can maybe change my view. I can look around because it automatically selects the eye tool for you, the look around. And you know what? that looks not bad. We'll call that my human perspective view. So I will right click and add, but all that did is created a new scene tab, not the correct name. And you can always go back to the scene manager by right clicking on any scene tab, and then you can just click on the scene tab and give it the name you want. So this first one, or the second one actually, detail, I forget exactly what I called it. This third one, call that one perspective. Now I'll abbreviate this one because you already know how to create a camera location and a top view. That'd be pretty easy. I'll just do the time. I want to show the shadows, and I'll create one called shadow off. You know what? I'm going to create, I'll do the time first here. So let's go back. There's one setting you should probably do if you're going to do things with shadows, and that is get your location correct. How do you get your location correct? You use the Google Add Location tool, and that is located underneath the Google toolbar. So you can open that up and it looks like this, or you can add it to your toolbar, and it's really quite simple. I'll click on Add Location, and let's search for Fargo, search, and just get in the same neighborhood. So here we go. I will select my region. Now this is kind of a neat thing. You can do this as a standalone project. You could start a SketchUp. In fact, a lot of times I'll do that. I'll start a SketchUp project this way, where I just open it up and move it into position. Now, honestly, this is close enough because the changes would be imperceptible. I could go to my top view here and move this down like this until it was lined up exactly. But as long as, and I just hit escape there, as long as the orientation is the same, this is a close enough where your shadows will be accurate. Just trust me. It would be like a millionth of an inch off because of this location. Now, if this was Texas, if I brought in a scene from Texas, then my shadows would obviously be inaccurate. But that's all I really need to do. This file is now geolocated, and I can see that if I go to Window, Model, Info, Geolocation. This model is accurately geolocated in Fargo. There we go. All right, now I don't even want this Google Earth stuff anymore. I just did that so I could geo-reference this. I can unlock that, hit delete. It's gone. The Google Earth Add Location, or the Google Add Location tool, actually adds two images. It adds a flat one and it adds a terrain one, which you can also see here. So let's right click, unlock that, and delete that as well. And once again, you got a couple extra layers. I mentioned earlier that your layers tend to get kind of tricky and overcomplicated. But now that there are no contents in these layers, I should be able to just delete them from the layers dialog. There we go. That part is now done. Oh yeah, the clock, the time. I did all that just to get my shadows correct. And let's say, for example, I want these to be on June 21st, which I believe is the summer solstice. A very sad day because the days start getting shorter after that. But you want your shadows dialog open to really customize this and make sure you've got this expanded mode here. And here's where you can set the date and the time of day. So I will type 6/21, get rid of that, and hit tab. So that'll be June 21st. And now I can either drag this slider, and you'll see it also changing up here, or I can just type this exactly. I'll just do 8, and I'll set that to 8 a.m. Oh, the other settings you can play around with, but that's all I'm really concerned about. Now I will add another one, but right away, before I change anything else here, I'm going to edit that with the Scene Manager. And this time, I want to only activate the shadow settings and not the camera location. And I'll change the name here to 8 a.m. That is reflected in my scene tab. Oh, you know what? I accidentally, that was bad. I changed the wrong one. I do that all the time. Make sure when you bring up the scene manager, even if you bring it up from this scene, you got to make sure and you click on the correct scene to make those changes. So, oh, what was this one? That was supposed to be human perspective. I'm just undoing manually what I did before. Then I'll highlight scene 4. It's kind of got a hard to see highlight gray box. This is the one I wanted to be 8 a.m. and only save the shadow settings. Now I can close that. Why did that not update? Let's do that one more time. Well, a small glitch here because I'm changing them here. Oh, maybe I got to hit this refresh little circle button. Nope. Maybe I need to hit return. Okay, that was weird. It was not updating up here, but what I did in my scenes dialog, hopefully you're not having that much trouble, is if I highlight it, click in this area, and then hit return on my keyboard, I would consider that a bug, but maybe it's a feature. Now this is all good. And I can close that. These should still be saved. Yep, they're still holding the perspectives. And I need to update my human perspective because that should be the overview. That's now the overview perspective. If you ever want to update it, here's what you do. You just zoom in, get your view, right click, and select update. This one only changes the shadow settings because I got my time dialed in, but I forgot to actually turn on my shadows from this button up here. I can click on that. Now my shadows are turned on. Now I can right click and select update as well. And you know what? While we're here, let's change another time. I'll just, rather than do the 2 p.m., I'll jump to 8 p.m. Make the change in my shadow settings dialog. And I'll right click and select add. And remember, it'll inherit the scene tab that you're adding from. Right click scene manager. I don't want to do thumbnails. Let's see here. I'll click on that scene tab, change the name to 8 p.m. Hit return because I just learned you really have to hit return. And then we'll create one more. You can create them also from the scene tab. You don't need to right click on the actual scene. So I'll create one from here. And I'll call this one shadows off. Also remembering the shadow settings, hit return. That is now updated. Close this, turn off my shadows up here, and then right click, update. Okay, it seems like tricky, but it's really not too bad. Now I've got my 8 a.m., my 8 p.m. My shadows are off with this button here, or scene tab. And the one other thing I didn't really talk about, earlier I did mention it, you can turn off animations or not include these in an animation. So for example, shadows off, I probably don't want to include that because that just changes a view. And these other ones too, maybe not so much, but without going into detail, let me show you why that's kind of neat. Because you can export an animation with the Pro version of SketchUp. And if I only wanted to export the views or the shadows, for example, and I've done that here. So here I've just got a very slow looping video that shows the shadows as they move throughout the site over the day. And this is just a video. Now the reason I would want to export this as a video is because SketchUp, especially 13 Pro, or I'm sorry, 14 is getting better at handling shadows. SketchUp 13 can't really on the fly, at least with my computer, maybe yours is faster, but it can't on the fly do that nice smooth playback. So that's why you may or may not want to include scenes in the animation. Had I included other scenes, that video would be jumping all over the place. So the last two examples here, I want to show controlling the visible layers, and you maybe have gotten the idea. Let's open up the scene manager. I'll create a new one from here, and that created scene 7. It inherited that one. That's why it's also set to not be included. And we'll call this one contours on. And I only want to save visible layers. And I'll turn off my shadow settings, hit return just to make sure that registers. And while I'm here, I'll create another one and call it contours off. Hit enter. So that now gives me these two guys up here. I can close this. Now I can quickly just go up here and update these on the fly. I'll activate my contours on. That's actually correct because my contours are in fact on. Then I will click on contours off, turn it off actually over here, and then right click update. There you go. Now I can turn those on and off. I can change my views. I can turn shadows on and off just by clicking these buttons here. What does 8 p.m. look like? So there you go. You get the idea of some of the strength that you can embed into scene tabs to help you with your design and your processing and your communication, all wrapped conveniently into a SketchUp workflow. There you go. Hopefully that's helpful. Any questions, please ask.